Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning.
So today we are talking about spiritual abuse and its role and kind of some of the doctrine within the two by two group. And so previously in our other videos, we've talked about it in kind of a broad sense. And today I'm going to be doing the majority of the talking about, from my perspective and many people's perspective, maybe some of the kind of nuanced ways that we have seen spiritual abuse played out in some of the doctrine that we've seen. And this conversation is difficult because I realize I'm speaking to a wide audience. And there are people that will listen to this and have maybe a large understanding of spiritual abuse and what it looks like and how it plays out, and name many ways that they have been spiritually abused. And then there are people that have been raised in this fellowship that will maybe completely disagree with the fact that they've been spiritually abused in any way. And what I've come to learn and realize is that if spiritual abuse happens early and often in our lives, it becomes so normalized that we don't see it as abuse at all. It's just all we've ever known, and it's our lived experience. But I think being able to identify it and name it and call it for what it is the first step towards healing. And I think often about what you say about having a radical commitment to honesty about our lived experience. Now, it's really hard to do. It's really hard to ask people to do. But if we are going to address healing, we have to be radically committed to being honest about it. So how I kind of thought about spiritual abuse and how I've seen it and seen it played out is there's individual, like, and we've talked about this before, right? Like individual to individual. So pastor to laity, husband to wife, parent to child, whatever it might be. And then there's systemic and doctrine. So ways that the church is organized and operates in some of its beliefs. Today, I'm going to try to focus on kind of the nuanced, subtle components of the two by two doctrine that are spiritually abusive. That might be hard to see, might be hard to name, but I do feel like it is a consistent experience across the majority of people that have left that have talked about these things. Jeremy, from your perspective and your experiences in other churches, maybe list out a few subtle, spiritually abusive things that you have seen, ways that other churches might operate.
Yeah, this is hard stuff. And again, my perspective is not from inside the two by twos. My perspective is going to be from outside. So, having grown up Baptist, I saw things in the Baptist ways of doing things that at the time were normal, that now, as an adult, I can see were maybe not healthy, caused some misuse of power. So there's some there. Also spent time in Presbyterian churches, a lot of years during college in Presbyterian denomination, also in Assemblies of God denomination as an adult, and then non-denominational. So I'm bringing, as a mental health professional, a perspective personally across multiple denominations, but also I have clients in every denomination outside of two by twos. So Catholics, Lutherans, Methodists, all of these people come and process. And it's interesting in that while the nuances of each individual system may be different, the core theme is a misuse of power. And ultimately, that could be power one on one, because as a marriage therapist, I see a lot of spiritual abuse of men who are given power in their system and expect things of the women that puts them in a power over position and misuses that power. And women are taught to just go along with it because that's what good Christian women do, only to
Mm-hmm.
find out later that's not at all what Christ would do.
Mm.
So some of those abuses could orbit around, oftentimes as a marriage counselor, I see sex, expectations around sex. And guys want sex and use spiritual justification to get it. And that falls under spiritual abuse. Same thing of kids, don't question me, don't have any bad emotions. I'm the dad, so if you make me upset, then now I get really mad and I'm the male head of the household. Well, then again, that's a form of spiritual abuse that then the men sometimes can be very abusive, harmful towards their children in ways that are justified by their spiritual doctrine. So it could be individual, it could be family. Each individual denomination has ways that they're trying to serve God well that sometimes can be received and distorted by the congregation that feeds, again, that power differential that is using the power in ways that benefit certain folks at the expense of other folks. And
Mm.
anytime that expense and benefit thing becomes imbalanced, I see what starts to border on an abuse of power.
I love how you pointed out that if you have abuse of power at a systemic top level, it will filter down and then impact interpersonal individual relationships. So,
Mm-hmm.
like the ripple effects of dangerous doctrine go and go and go and go and go.
It's not just about the doctrine.
No, yeah, that's a very good point. So, one thing that you mentioned, which is the first thing that's on my list, is about questions. Um, a, a, a huge part of, I feel like, the 2x2 doctrine is not being able to ask questions. Questions are discouraged, or only certain types of questions are allowed. And when I talk about this also, I'm not just saying questions directed to the ministry or questions directed to the system itself. I'm talking about questions, period. So even willingness to ask God questions, willing to ask myself questions, like questions in general are shut off. And I'll list a couple of quotes that I have heard many, many times throughout my life from the platform, from workers, from other workers that have been in our homes, from meetings, emails, letters. Doubt your doubts. Don't put a question mark where God puts a period. I have enough doubts. Keep yours to yourself. Just even a couple of weeks ago, there was a letter that was put out by a Texas overseer directed towards youth, and it listed basically the spirit that they needed to have when they asked questions, and maybe they weren't asking questions for the right reasons. Any dictation whatsoever about how to ask questions and what questions are to be asked are spiritually abusive. And I feel like within the group, questions and doubting are viewed as a lack of faith and trust in God himself. And so while the sentiment of these ideas could theoretically be encouraging, it subtly discourages wrestling with questions that I believe God calls us to ask, he wants us to ask. I've heard recently that the opposite of faith is not doubt, it is control and certainty.
Mm.
And I love how Diane Langberg called the Pharisees, they had a pride of exactness. They were so certain in what they thought that they knew that they were unable to see Jesus right in front of them. And it provides a sense of security, but it removes faith. And I would argue that a foundation of faith is a willingness to ask God hard questions. He is not threatened. And only in asking him and ourselves hard questions is our faith allowed to grow deeper or even grow at all. Rigid beliefs do not lead to faith. They lead to spiritual stagnation in our relationship with God and with others. We are not asked to check our brains at the door.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I believe that if we are walking into settings that claim to be led by God, we are called to use our brains even more to discern if what they are saying and what they are teaching is right. God gave us intelligence and knowledge and wisdom in scripture so that we could come to answers for ourselves with no intermediary required, all questions allowed, all questions encouraged. I think asking questions shows humility because it shows I don't have the answers. I'm asking, I'm coming to you. I don't know. It takes faith to ask those questions. And then, like we talked about being radically committed to honesty, it takes faith to be ready for whatever answer may come from those questions. We have to ask those questions in a spirit of, I don't know, and I'm willing for whatever answer may come. I listened to a podcast recently about critical thinking, and I loved this idea. It talked about critical thinking is less about researching something and knowing why you believe what you do, and much more about asking yourself why you feel uncomfortable with something and being critical of what makes us uncomfortable, being critical of what questions we aren't willing to ask, what areas we aren't willing to go into. And being critical thinking is being willing to sit in the discomfort of that. The Place We Find Ourselves podcast had a really good podcast about dogmatic thinking. And they said that being dogmatic is much less about the content of your beliefs and much more about whether or not your beliefs are truth with a capital T. how
Mm.
strongly you hold on to those beliefs. So people that are dogmatic are certain that whatever they believe is right, anyone that disagrees with them is wrong, and their opinions are held as facts. No room for questions, no room for doubt, no room for growth. And in that same podcast, he says that being a Christian is much less about saying I hold and more about saying I am held. And so if we aren't willing to ask questions, we are saying, I'm holding on to these beliefs. They are truth with a capital T. They are facts. I will not question. I will not doubt, because that is faith to me. And in reality, faith is letting go of what I hold and saying, I am held even in my questions. I am held not in spite of my questions, but I am held with my questions. And
Can I interject something right there?
yes,
The phrase, not I hold, but I am held. That's, I love that idea, that concept, because the idea of I hold means who's got the power and control.
yeah, I do. Exactly.
So I hold these doctrines. I have the right answers. I know. And when that mentality kicks in from a psychological perspective, all other questions become threats because I have to hold the truth and knowledge. But the whole gospel that Jesus that I know, he came to let you know, let us know, I love you and accept you as you are. You don't have to know and control. You are held. I'm the one that holds you. God the Father holds you. So you can be uncertain, mad, angry, confused, asking lots of questions. You can be hurt and frustrated, all these things, and you can wrestle with me. And I'm not threatened by that.
So
That's
good.
being held versus I hold the truth.
So good. Yep. It's a question of who is in power, who is in control.
Mm-hmm.
A church called Tove talks about that basically being able to ask questions is a requirement of a healthy system. And it says an organization that perpetuates abuse will question those who question, make the discussion of problems the problem, silence those who break silence, and descend on those who dissent. So they describe questions are the biggest safeguard against corruption. So a faith or a system that cannot be questioned cannot be trusted.
Emotions.
Yes.
I had one final thought on that section you were talking about with the critical thinking. Can I share a little blip on
Love
that
it.
one?
Yes.
Okay. So in the church called Tove, when he talks about the organization that perpetuates abuse will question those who ask questions. Basically, it's not okay to think. It's not okay to explore. I want to share just a little snippet of a personal experience that will drive home this point that's like practical.
Great.
Years ago, I taught at a certain school that asked me to teach it was Christian worldview is what they called it at the time. And they wanted me to help kids learn to be critical thinkers. So what was interesting was I was tasked with the job of helping them think critically. And what was interesting is the system I discovered very quickly had certain families that absolutely would not tolerate Jeremy Smith, the teacher, asking the kids to think through and analyze and own for themselves their own faith and why we call this bad, why we call that good, why is this behavior considered appropriate and this not, and to think through what is the heart of God in this, not just this is the required behavior of God. So in that process, some of the parents thought I was the cat's meow. I was the coolest thing since sliced bread because, oh my gosh, my kids are actually learning how to think for themselves. And that was a system in the family that encouraged asking questions. They wanted their kids to think critically so they'd be prepared for the future. What's interesting is that other families in that particular school wanted to tar and feather me and run me out because their family system did not want questions, did not want to be challenged, didn't want the kids to think for themselves. So it's interesting that while the church called Tove is talking about churches, it's the same principle with any system, no matter how big or small. And that I had a firsthand exposure to family systems where questioning was okay and other family systems where questioning was not. To think for oneself was taboo versus you just you go explore and your teacher's going to ask you to think. I'm going to ask you to think. You guys got to own this for yourself. So just a little critical thinking, firsthand experience that this is not just churches. This is any system, including family systems.
And what's fascinating and terrifying to me is that we encourage our kids in general to critical think about everything except this one area of our life, the most important area of our life. So the next topic I want to discuss is about feelings and emotions. So in general, I would say much of the kind of the subtle 2x2 doctrine is that any feelings other than what are perceived to be positive are discouraged and viewed as a lack of faith or wrong spirit. And Jeremy, I often think of what you would say in therapy, that feelings are not good or bad, they just are, which is totally the opposite of my entire lived experience, because I feel like immediately, as soon as I have ever felt an emotion, I immediately want to label it as good or bad and put it into that box. And then depending on how I label it, then I will handle it. I will suppress it, or I will numb it out, or I will avoid it, or whatever. Whereas if it's labeled good, I'll try to work through that. So to suppress doubt, anger, frustration, sadness, humiliation, is to suppress the entire range of emotions God has given us. And I tried to work really hard on viewing all of them as a gift. They're not good or bad, they just are. And they prompt us to dig deeper and work harder on what we're feeling and why we're feeling it, and get to know God through that process. I heard a phrase last year at church that stopped me in my tracks. They said, God's chest is big enough to pound on. And that completely brought me to my knees, because previously I feel like I have all of those negative emotions that I put into my bad box. Instead of going to God's chest and pounding on him with it, those feelings in that box just pushed me farther and farther and farther away from God. And I never gave myself or gave God the opportunity to work through those feelings at all. And our emotions are not a threat to God. They are a way we can connect to him, good and bad, right? And on a personal note, Jeremy, I'm not sure if you even remember this, but probably one of the biggest spiritual reckonings of my life was, we have some very good friends who had a 12-year-old who was diagnosed with bone cancer. And we knew immediately he was not going to live. And I was spiritually devastated, because I had to come to terms with the fact that I was supposedly serving and loving a God who could take my children away at any second, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. And my brain and my soul could not come to terms with this. I was so confused and so sad and so angry. And yet I was not willing to address that. I wasn't willing to even talk to my husband about it. And you could tell during therapy that I was upset about it. I don't think I even came right out and said it. But you got up right close to me and you said, it is okay to question the goodness of God. And my brain exploded, because that might as well have been blasphemy in my world. I mean, to say something bad about God or to question if God was good was never, never okay. And yet, when I gave myself the freedom to think that, to question that, to wonder that, only then could I work through those feelings. And only then could I come to God honestly and actually work through that. And what's crazy is we've been taught that we can't keep anything from God. Nothing's a secret. He knows everything. Then why am I trying to put this in the corner and shove this down into the depths of my soul? Why? He knows. It's buried in there. And so to pretend that those emotions and those questions don't exist, especially if we feel them against God, is to ignore the opportunity for a deeper relationship with him and with others. And look at the entire range of emotions Jesus himself showed. And Lamentations and Isaiah and Psalms are full of questions and anger and rage. And to deny ourselves those range of human emotions is to deny our God-given humanity to feel, and to therefore experience comfort and joy. I love what you've talked about of like, our emotions are on a plane, right? And so if we only allow ourselves to go this low, to feel this bad, anger, humiliation, sadness, whatever, if we numb out and we ignore, we can only go that high for our perceived positive emotions. And so the more we stretch down here, the more we feel up here. And it's hard and it's difficult, but we are limiting our God-given humanity in that. And I think, go ahead.
For clarity's sake, I just heard you say positive and negative.
I know, perceived. I keep trying to
But
say
here's the
perceived.
thing. It's fair. From a mental health perspective, I want to highlight that this is valid. There's
Right.
positive and negative emotions, but positive and negative does not equate to good and bad.
So good.
So they're neither good nor bad. They just are. But notice you did have to identify there are positive feelings and negative feelings. There's things that make us feel up and things that make us feel down. Well, positive and negative is all good, but not good or bad.
Right. Because they don't feel good. They don't feel good at all.
Right.
It's very hard. Yeah.
They don't feel good, but it doesn't make them bad.
Yeah. And I think one reason why abusive systems label negative emotions is you're labeled as bitter if you feel or express a negative emotion towards the system or leader or abuse. And in the Holy Hurt podcast, I have a quote from Hillary McBride. She says, "Our wounds, whatever they are made more powerful by silence around them. Voicelessness, or the internalized silencing of our voices being trapped by those with the most power, telling us not to trust what our pain has already told us. The naming of what has hurt us, how we have been hurt and how we have hurt others, and how it still lingers with us, is the very undoing of the cloak of invisibility that keeps the pain stuck. And this, the naming, the unveiling, the unsettling truth, as painful as it is central to how we heal our spiritual trauma." Anything, Jeremy?
That's a painful step into reality.
Mm-hmm.
I do have some initial thoughts. Can I talk about from systems psychology is kind of my gig. Mm-hmm. From a systems perspective, I just want to highlight the fact that negative emotions will be a threat to the system. Mm-hmm. Because the system is stable so long as people are compliant, they go with it. There's no conflict. There's no sadness, pain, wounds to have to address. And so long as we don't have to address them, the system is stable. But stable may come at a cost to the members of the system. Thus, all systems who are unhealthy or some degree of unhealthy will seek to suppress the negative emotions of the members of that system because it is unsettling for those in power. It is unstabilizing for the system. And this could be churches, even families. So many families I have worked with and know that mom and dad don't know how to handle their negative emotions. Therefore, if the kids have negative emotions, it's unsettling for the family system. It's destabilizing because mom and dad don't know how to deal with the negative emotions. So the kids learn, never show negative emotions, always be happy, suppress my stuff and cram it down inside. So same thing with a family system as for like a religious system. But it's interesting that the healthier the leaders of the system, the power holders get, the more they can embrace that emotions are neither good nor bad, they just are. And they can engage the negative emotions in ways that are therapeutic and healing for themselves, which means then the kids in a family system are free to bring up their negative emotions and mom and dad are not destabilized. Mm-hmm. In much the same way, religious systems, as you're hearing here with this Holy Hurt podcast, the healthy systems that are open to and receiving and engage the fact that people are feeling hurt, wounded, betrayed, deceived, all these negative emotions, the system that can receive that openly and sit with it is one that will repair relationship. Mm-hmm. They can handle the negative emotions, but that only happens if the leaders have done the work to be healthy enough to be able to receive and handle their negative emotions, much less those of the system. You got some thoughts, it looks like.
I do. I love that you use the word repair, because I have had to come to terms with in my own personal work that all relationships, if we are in relationship with one another and in systems, we will hurt one another. That's just how it is.
Guaranteed.
That is something that we have to deal with and we have to accept. The difference is, can you repair? That's what a healthy connection and a healthy relationship and a healthy system is when it comes to repair. Yeah, I love you pointed that out. So I want to kind of sum up a little bit the last two things I've talked about. No asking questions, or questions are discouraged, and negative emotions are discouraged. And what those things result in is inauthenticity and a lack of vulnerability. We aren't real.
Mm-hmm.
We're robots. And that's not what God wants. God wants our full, true, authentic, vulnerable selves. And I like how you discuss it as broken and beloved. So I can show up to God, I can be real with God with my issues as my authentic self, and I am still beloved. I am still important. I am still valued to him. And until I learn that, I cannot safely be real with others around me. Right? We view others then as a threat because I need to maintain some sort of an image.
Mm-hmm.
But because of his grace and knowing we can be known and fully loved, suddenly it becomes safe to be vulnerable. We can show up for others as our vulnerable true selves. And if we believe we are free from shame, we can be real. But if we are trapped in shame, we cannot show up as real. Any thoughts on that?
I'm having two thoughts. One is a flashback of like me raising my kids. And it's like, do I want my kids that I can tell are hurt and feeling embarrassed and ashamed? Do I want them to pretend they're fine so they can have a relationship with me? Or do I want my son who's having a meltdown, even this morning, my son who's having a meltdown to come sit with me, to express his anger and his frustration, to tell me why he's feeling overwhelmed, to tell me why he's hurt with the way I responded to something, and to show up unrefined, all kinds of emotions bubbling over. But then I see his truth, his reality. What is he really experiencing and feeling? And I can meet him there. I personally, I would much rather have the second because I know what's real with this kid and I can help him and meet him in that pain, as opposed to asking my child to show up fake, to
Right.
pretend to have a certain demeanor such that he can connect with me, when that pretending is the very thing that keeps us
Mhm.
disconnected.
And I just want to point out, use the word fake, and I want to just point out like how I felt when I didn't ask myself questions and I didn't allow myself to maybe have negative emotions. I didn't feel fake. It was that I was subconsciously closing that off. So I was so sincere in wanting a relationship with God and with others. It wasn't anything that I was even consciously trying to do. So I don't want to insinuate that people are fake. It's just something that I think, like you have talked about psychologically, is just closed. That it
It's a
takes a lot of
learned
work.
behavior. The system will teach us. Well, if I can compare it to other systems, depending on the spectrum of religious denominations, there are some religious denominations that say you have to show up this very gregarious way in order
Right.
to be connected with God. And you have to, for some, you have to speak in other languages. And if you speak in other languages, then you're really connected with God. But if you're not, you're being fake. So
Mhm.
notice how the fake or not connected with God or not real is defined by the system rather than being defined by who God really made you to be.
Right. Right. Once again, who holds the power in our relationship with God? Is it the system or is it us making that choice?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, another kind of part of the doctrine is, and this was once again something that's very nuanced, something that was very subtle, but I felt inherently bad. And the Holy Herd podcast once again really helped me with this. She describes that the most damaging form of spiritual abuse is to be taught that we are inherently bad. And so the idea that we are made in his image and are inherently good and loved in him is a new and completely life-changing concept for me. But I feel like for myself, I've come to know that if I haven't laid the foundation at the very bottom, that I am inherently loved and good as I am, I simply cannot build anything on top of that. Nothing else makes sense. Nothing else is real until I can fully have that foundation that I am good and loved by God. And I think for most people raised in communities with this belief, they have believed that they are inherently bad for as long as they have known. And so it becomes embedded into our entire identity that we are fundamentally broken and flawed, and love from God must be earned. This was not something that I consciously realized or thought. It's something that I've had to really work through and have radical commitment to honesty about how I viewed God viewed me.
Mm-hmm.
And so the implication, if I am inherently bad, is then God becomes someone to fear. He becomes someone to hide from, and my relationship with him suffers. If I am viewed as bad, I cannot trust myself. I cannot listen to myself. I cannot listen to what my body is trying to tell me. And so the solution that religious institutions or systems offer for this discomfort is, well, we'll tell you. We'll tell you the answers. We'll tell you what to believe. We'll tell you what to think. We know best. And so we outsource that and our beliefs, our convictions, and our choices to the system itself, or to people that are seen as being closer to God. So if I am taught that I can't trust myself, I have absolutely no choice but to blindly trust other people, which completely counters the doctrine of the gospel and the good news, because God works in you and in me. I am created in his image. I am fully known and fully loved. Once again, a quote from Holy Hurt. She says, spiritually abusive communities sell fear, but they also sell that they have a solution to that fear. So you need them, you need to keep coming back. And the result is someone driven by fear and shame, which is not a healthy place to having a loving relationship with God. We are taught fear in packages labeled with love. Here, this is love, I love you. But then when you open it up, it just creates more and more fear. And then the cycle continues. So spiritually abusive communities benefit when we view ourselves as bad and unworthy and not trustworthy, because the result when something goes wrong or feels off is we immediately question ourselves. I am the problem. I am something that needs addressed, not anyone else and not the system. And I think I kept going back to Matthew 22 when we're instructed, love your others as you love yourself. Well, if I wasn't taught to love myself, how the heck am I going to show up right for others?
Mm-hmm.
So, Jeremy, what are your thoughts on this? Because this is once again really nuanced, because I know we are flawed, we are broken. How do you reconcile that?
Oh, this is tricky. And I do want to acknowledge I have a little bit of anxiety answering this question because I don't have the personal experience and background of 2x2. So I know that sometimes bringing up doctrine and theology can be experienced as intimidating and misused. So I don't want in any way to have the impression that I've got the answers. This is where I'm at with my current understanding. This is how I would interpret this based on my emotional, mental, and spiritual health that I've been coached and trained on. And this is my understanding of scripture. And I'll do my best. Here's how I would make sense of this principle. Are we good or bad? And again, I can say the words and people can misinterpret. So send your questions to Michaela. She'll answer.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thanks.
Unequivocally, 100%, undoubtedly, I land firmly in that we are inherently good. Here's why. I go back to Genesis and I read the account, and every single day that God created something, he said it was
good.
There it is, folks. Every day, everything he created is good. So if the creation is made in his image to reflect him, and he's a good God, then everything it creates is good. And on day 6, Adam and Eve, according to the Genesis account, were created on day 6. And he declared that it was not just good, but that's the one time he switched languages to it was very good. So it's interesting that all of creation is good, but when he made Adam and Eve humans, it was very good. So the initial design of humanity is that we are made in the image of God. If he's good, then we're good. And we were put in a good, humans were put in a good environment, in a very good situation. This whole thing was very good. So inherently, our identity is good. Undoubtedly, to me, unquestionable. Now, can good people make bad decisions? And I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. Good people make bad decisions all the time, but identity is very different than behavior. Who you are as a good person, your identity wrapped in Christ, may reflect in the way you behave, but in a broken world, we will make choices over here that our behavior is bad, but that does not affect our identity. So my son may make choices that are very poor choices, but it doesn't change the fact he's still my son. I also thought of the imagery of a diamond. A diamond is beautiful, it is valuable, and when it is made, it is always a diamond. Now, if you run that diamond through pigsty and it's layered in pig poop and mud, it looks pretty bad. It was probably a bad choice to run your wedding ring through the mud. It's very dirty, but is it still no longer a diamond? It is still a precious diamond. It is just coated in the muck of life. So
Mhm.
for me, undoubtedly, we are 100% good. And I know there are doctrines in certain denominations that would say otherwise. And part of the reason they do that is specifically because they react to, in my opinion, they react to the tendency of man's pride. So, in order to crush pride, they build doctrines that make sure we don't think that we're all good and thus justified in our bad behavior. So, it's again, a distortion and a twist, I think, of using behavior and condemning behavior and somehow that equating back to our identity. So these are doctrines that I don't want to get into here, but just point out like this is all the things that we should be exploring and questioning. Am I inherently good or bad? I think it's good. Do I do bad things? I do. But even if I do and I'm broken, does that mean my identity is any less? I'd say no way. I think we're still absolutely good.
That's really great. Can you touch really quick on what you think may be a potential result in an abusive system of feeling like I am inherently bad? What are some things that that can result in?
Total abdication of self-responsibility, critical thought, trusting self, standing up against the system, calling out truth. You can't live in reality. If I'm bad, for instance, I can't trust myself. If I can't trust myself, I can't recognize that that is abuse. If I can't trust myself, the misuse of power over children is something that maybe I'm misinterpreting because I'm bad. Or if I were to maybe call that out and speak to others about that, now somehow I'm bad because I'm addressing something that
Mhm.
supposedly in the system is good or okay or permissible. But as long as I believe I'm bad, my voice is taken, my autonomy is taken. I don't have the power to live in reality.
So good. And that it's crazy how that combines with the no questions, no bad feelings. They're all very, very intertwined. Okay. The next thing that I have listed is elevation of suffering. Once again, subtle, but it's there. And once again, this is nuanced because there are Bible verses that support suffering for righteous sake in persecution. The life and death of Jesus was full of suffering and persecution. And I know a big thing within the 2x2 system is the focus on Jesus being our example. We want to be exactly like Jesus. We'll look at how much Jesus suffered. Well, now we should suffer. But at the end of the day, the focus on the elevation of suffering is a tactic of control that keeps us from advocating for ourselves and our families to make us think that suffering is equal to righteousness. So from what I have thought about it, we are not guaranteed that this life will be easy. This life is incredibly hard and we face very difficult things. And so I feel like suffering may be a component of serving him and being in relationship with him, but it is not the purpose of serving him. It is not something we should seek out. It is not something we should idolize. I feel like we often idolized suffering. um I believe that Jesus suffered so that we don't have to. Like, he took that on himself, so now we get to live in freedom and enjoy. And I have seen many victims and victims' families completely discount or minimize what they have experienced in the name of spiritual suffering. Like, I will endure this, I won't question it, I won't bring it up because we are called to suffer and this is what I am called to do. And so we self police ourselves into compliance, believing we are right with God by enduring injustice and abuse. In reality, God calls us to act on it. And I once again, KJ Ramsey, she's an amazing author, discusses a lot of spiritual abuse. She says the diminishment of humanness is handed down as spiritual maturity. Jeremy, what are your thoughts on this? Does Jesus call us to suffer in our call to be like Christ?
Nothing like walking into a hornet's nest, huh? And again, not growing up in 2 by 2, man, I hope I don't want to say words that like could be like in that system understood a certain way that I'm not implying, but hot diggity dang, this is a big one. So as you were talking, the word that caught my attention was idolize. And I just want to point out here, the idolization is the problem,
Hmm.
not the suffering. And I'm
Hmm.
going to flip that coin over because as I look at other systems, other religious systems, they idolize something different. Some religious systems idolize not suffering, they think it's bad. So they idolize blessing. So, for
Mm.
instance, the prosperity gospel is
Prosperity
one of those.
gospel.
Bingo. So, what's their idol? Financial flourishing, having everything you want, all the physical tangibles, having lots of money. Like that's the idol, but their idol manifests as blessing versus what you're describing. The idol of the 2 by 2 system is that they're idolizing the suffering. I personally think suffering is a byproduct of righteousness because in a system world, like the world is broken, sinful, in a sinful system, those that choose righteousness won't fit. So there's going to be conflict. If you choose righteousness, there will be suffering because you're in a system that's not healthy. In the resurrection, the system will be healthy, so righteousness will not be met with suffering. Righteousness will be met with delight.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking here, does Jesus call us directly to suffer? I don't think so. I think he calls us to righteousness. And I think about him. Did he, even the night before his cruise or the night before being arrested, he was sweating blood in the Garden of Gethsemane, saying, "I don't want this. I
Hmm.
don't want this suffering." It wasn't like, "Sweet, I'm going to be awesome, and God's going to love me because
God's gonna love me more because of my suffering.
bingo."
Hmm.
He's like, "Oh heaven, oh God, please take this from me. I don't want this." Time
Right.
and time again, he went back. "I don't want this. Don't make me suffer. I don't want to do this."
Right.
So the fact is, I don't think he calls us to suffer. I think
Hmm.
even look at your words, like he's calling us to righteousness. And as a byproduct in a broken, sinful, fallen world, the byproduct will be suffering because it doesn't fit here.
Hmm.
But that's not the way the world is supposed to be. So when the world is right, then that righteousness will be met with delight and joy. So that's my first thoughts. How's
Yeah.
that land? Is that okay?
I love it. I love it. Yep. It's a part of it. And I think it's potentially even offensive to the power of his sacrifice and his suffering to continue to focus on it. Like he did that for us. For me to continue to stick myself in that suffering, I feel like Jesus is saying, "Get out. I saved you from that. Come join me in the light and in the joy."
I'm having a picture in my head here of someone who fell down in a well. They're sitting down there in the muck and the mire and the grossness. And I was like, "Oh, woe is me." And she's like, "I gave you the ladder.
Right.
You don't have to live down here. Now, if you fall in again, I still love you. I'll
Right.
give you a ladder again. Climb on out. But
Yeah.
why are you down there? Come on
Right.
out."
Right. Right. Okay, and the next one I have is rules or works or traditions is salvation. And we talked about this a decent amount in our religion and gospel video that we did. I feel like we could do an entire video on grace and works and all of this. But I think at the end of the day, what I thought about was the difference between unity and uniformity. So when non-essentials and non-fundamentals are preached as essentials, uniformity becomes the standard. So the focus on rules and traditions and outward markers and as components of salvation, we're relying on the law to attain our salvation, which is in direct opposition to the gospel. And I think we get stuck there because I like how you've pointed out, Jeremy, it feels good. It feels safe.
Mm-hmm.
We have a checklist. They are concrete. We can check a box. We can meet them. They allow us to have an outward appearance of righteousness so we can feel approved by others. Our value is based on how we perform as a person and how others reward or criticize our behavior. And we focus on me. I get to choose what I do, my own works, and that results in serving God out of obligation, fear, and reward, and becomes transactional instead of relational. So we cannot base a relationship on spiritual practices, even if the motivation is pure and to connect with God, because God cannot meet us in performance. I don't think God can find us there. I think God can only find us in relationship. And there was a great quote I heard recently: production does not mean presence, and activity does not mean intimacy. He wants a relationship. I heard Tim Mackey put it as, pretend you're having a great meal with a friend, and then someone walks up to you, you're ready to pay, and someone walks up to you and says, "Oh, that man over there paid for your meal." Okay. And you can say, "No, no, 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 I feel uncomfortable with that. I would like to pay for my meal." And they insist, "No, it's done. Like, it's been paid. It's been paid." And in order to alleviate how uncomfortable that makes you, you demand to go in the back and wash dishes. Right? Like, what? I let me pay for this. That was a gift. That's something I wanted to do for you. You cannot work to alleviate how uncomfortable that makes you. But we have a tendency to do that because that's what feels good.
As a mental health therapist, my mind is just running to, well, let's explore. What is it about receiving that gift that's
Thank
uncomfortable for you?
you.
Like,
Well, I
that's
think
the trick.
a lot of it goes back to, I am wrong. I am bad.
Mhm.
I can't. I have to perform in order to be valuable.
And by you giving me a gift, you take away that power to control my narrative.
Yeah, I would love to do potentially a video on just this idea. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I took a note on here. As you're talking about God meeting us in the performance, another principle came to my mind that I talk about often in therapy, the idea of wearing masks and putting on masks to cover our shame. So even like when Adam and Eve were escorted out of the garden, God made them clothing to cover their shame, not because he felt bad about it, but because he loved them enough to recognize, yeah, you guys are hiding from me already and you're embarrassed about your bodies. I'll give you some clothes here. You're wearing this covering where you didn't need that covering before. We could be totally vulnerable and intimate, and it was beautiful. So when people show up in performance mentality trying to perform for God, it's like wearing a mask. So in that mask, does God actually get to see you? He
Just
sees
see
the mask. He
performance.
doesn't actually see the person. So that was just the picture that came to mind. The idea is like this performance of trying to be good, to be right, to show up the way we think he wants us to show up. That's all putting on the masks. So the love then is stopped and received by the mask. So the irony is it's a catch 22. The better you perform, the less love and acceptance you actually feel. Because who's getting the love and acceptance? Is it you or is it the
The
mask?
mask.
So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that the better we perform, the less love we actually feel and the less acceptance we actually feel, because we know we're still bad because people like the mask. So I
So
better wear the
true.
masks more.
So good.
Can I back up one more comment on the non-essentials?
Yes.
Okay, so you kicked off this section talking about the non-essentials. There is a diagram that I was taught long ago that was really helpful thinking about the non-essentials. Think of like concentric rings. In the very center are the things of the faith that we should die for. Then there are the second rings that are not the core things, but really close. Those are the things that we debate. And then there's the third ring. This is the ring of things we discuss. We don't know for sure. There's a whole lot of speculation. It doesn't really matter either way. We can be in unity with one another about the things we'll die over, but we don't have to be in unity about the things we debate, nor the things we discuss. The unity is found here. The unity is not found in the debate and the discuss. So when you talk about making the non-essentials essentials, that's taking things that should be in the discussion ring and putting them in the die for ring.
Yep.
Or die for center point.
And that's where you get the dogmatic thinking that I mentioned.
Bingo. Exactly. And for 2x2s, it's certain things they put in the center.
Right.
For the Presbyterians, it's different things they put in the center. For the Catholics, it's different things. For the Charismatics, it's different things. So just the point, like for what we see in the gospel, we're going to interpret differently throughout the Bible. And what things do we put in what part of the circle? And until you actually like become a missionary and go live overseas and have to question all of your thinking, you realize there's not actually a whole lot here in the die.
No, there's not. I keep taking things out.
Yep.
Yep.
I don't know. That sounds actually like another good video to go down.
It
Things
does.
you're taking out of the die category.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. Okay, the next section I want to talk about is Gnosticism. And this is a new term for me. Very, very different term for me. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but from what I do know about it, this very much relates to my previous worldview in the 2x2s. So it's the belief that none of the natural matters. The natural world is entirely evil and corrupt. And this can result in basically an extreme form of self-denial that says you shouldn't engage with the natural world because it is destructive, temporary, dust to dust. None of this matters. None of this has any meaning at all. On kind of an extreme basis, my dad was raised very, very much with this view, so much so that poor grades were almost borderline encouraged, if not very much accepted, because it was a confirmation that he cared about the right things.
That's quite an assumption.
Yeah. And that in fact he might go in the ministry because he is a failure, or whatever, in academics or whatever it might be. And so my dad got several awards for different poems or artwork or whatever, and that was not acknowledged. Like, there was no acknowledgement whatsoever of any of that. He took his own like photos of his high school and college graduation on a timer with a cap and gown, because they wouldn't even acknowledge any natural accomplishments whatsoever. So that's a pretty extreme view, but it's just a picture. And I mean, he discusses even now dealing with enjoying something, and then he'll have a voice in his head that says, I can't do that. That's not spiritual. So with a little time and distance from this mindset, it's become a little more obvious to me why the CSA crisis within the community has been largely ignored. If it's natural and it's of this world and none of it matters, why address it? If only spiritual things matter, if only being in meetings matter, if only reading your Bible matters. And I know I've quoted this before. It's my favorite quote from Tim Mackey of all time. The biggest indicator of the health of our relationship with God is the health of our relationship with others. How we view God, how we are in relationship with God, will absolutely be lived out in this life. Quote from Holy Herd again. She says, many of us have been led to believe that spirituality is something else or somewhere else, or it belongs in the realm of the unreal, the transcendent, and certainly not connected to our bodies, not right here. And she says, this separation, the separation of all parts of life, is actually one of our original spiritual wounds. So I believe God lives in the here and now. And I think one of the biggest verses that I misinterpreted was, I was told that God does not live in temples made with hands, and that means we don't have church buildings. In reality, that means God lives right in here in you and me, and how I treat you and how I love you is a reflection of how I love God. So being a Christian isn't about experiencing the kingdom of heaven someday. It's about experiencing it today, every day. Jeremy, what are your thoughts on this? Does the natural matter? How are they connected?
Short answer is yes, absolutely. There's a tool that came to my mind, a framework, another principle that I want to offer that I think would help integrate all of it. So here's what I teach when I'm working with clients, trying to figure out how to make sense of life, in that humans have 4 key aspects to their humanity. So this is a little bit of a joke. Think about, like, as a kid, head, shoulder, knees and toes, knees and toes. So think of this. Humans are physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. So it's like the head, shoulders, knees, and toes backwards. So physical, slapping my legs, we are physical beings. So as physical beings, we do need to take care of our physical bodies. God made us physical. We need to take care of our physical bodies. If the physical suffers, all the other aspects suffer as well. We are emotional in that we have emotions that are neither good nor bad. They're just part of who we are, and we learn to navigate them. How we respond to those emotions could be good or bad, which is why we do emotional mental health counseling. So there's physical and there's emotional. Both of these are created by God. They are good. There's also mental aspects. So this is like psychology. Do I have good mental health? Am I doing good things with boundaries? Am I understanding how the world works, how my emotions work, how my body works? Do I understand all this? And then lastly, we are spiritual beings, where there's an aspect of us that is non-tangible, very much spiritual, relating to God and the ethereal. So physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. All four of these God created to be aspects of our humanity. And if we were made and he made the physical, it's important to him. He made 5 days worth of creation that was entirely physical. So it matters to him. It's an expression of his beauty, of his character. God even mentioned like the rocks will cry out if the people don't. It's like, oh my
Yes.
gosh, all of creation is singing my glory, my beauty. So yes, physical totally matters. Natural matters. So we are physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Nature is just part of the physical. And one thing that struck me in my spiritual journey was that someone taught me, you are glorifying God when you redeem the earth, when you redeem your plot of land. So we bought a house and it was kind of run down and the land was a disaster. So we spent the next 5 years redeeming it. And every time I would work in the yard, work on the physical, work on painting the walls, it's like Sarah and I just kept remembering, in a lot of ways, this is us pushing back on the effects of sin. This is us
Mhm.
pushing back on entropy and death and like all of this junk and the property. We're cleaning it out. We're making it beautiful again. It's physical, yes. It's the natural world, yes, but there's a spiritual component to that cleaning up process, a spiritual and psychological component to making things beautiful because it echoes the heart of God. So there's a lot of thoughts right there, Michaela. I hope that landed
Yeah.
okay.
Yep. I like it. I believe God loves it all and it matters to him. Yep. Okay, I think this is a good place to stop. Any other last minute things you want to add in? Sum it up.
The journey is beautiful. And when we can hold it loosely and recognize I don't have to have all the answers and I'm going to have different answers today than I do a year from now. Like this is the journey and God delights in it. And I think of the story in Genesis where I think it was Jacob was wrestling with God. God wanted him to wrestle. He showed up and
Mhm.
he invited Jacob to wrestle.
Mhm.
Jacob stood no chance. Is it God? Oh my gosh, there's no way he had a chance he was going to win.
Mhm.
But God's like, I don't care. Wrestle with me anyway. I dare you. Let's wrestle all night long. I want you to wrestle.
I love Jeremy, even shortly after Brandon and I left the group, we came to you and Sarah and we're like, what do we do? What do you think? What is church? What is the meaning of this? What does God think about this? And I a lot of your answers were just keep wrestling. And that's an answer. That's an okay answer
Yep.
because we don't know. We don't know a lot. But God wants us to just keep wrestling. It's safe. His chest is big enough to pound on, his chest is big enough to ask questions to.
Oh, that is beautiful.
All right. And then I think in the next video, we're going to talk about maybe some of the effects of spiritual abuse and how to work through it and how to heal from it.
Sounds awesome.
Sounds
Thanks for
good.
doing this. This is fun.
Thank you, Jeremy. We'll talk soon.